declarations of conflict of interest. Approval of the agenda. Moved by Councillor McFadden. All those in favor? Carried. So I'll go to item number 2, Matthew Williams, project leader. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew. First of all, I just want to give you a very brief status of where we are with this project and how it fits into the Metrolinx work. Presentation on this study process was provided to General Committee last June as we were just starting the project. Now phase 1 is now complete, and the directions report summarizes the findings. This report sets the overall framework and the vision, while the details of the initial environmental assessment phases and business case and other study elements are being prepared through the next stages of the study, which are to be wrapped up this fall. We are simultaneously working with Metrolinx on the business case assessment. This process will analyze the project feasibility and is our opportunity to establish the priority of this project compared to others and get it into the provincial budget process. And you may have saw in the Star today, Toronto has a number of projects that they're vying for. So all of these will be evaluated and presented to the Metrolinx board together. And the intent is that this work will be done by July. Rapid transit for this corridor was identified by Places to Grow, Move Ontario 2020, and most recently the Metrolinx Regional Transportation Plan, which identified it as one of the top 15 priority projects. And from a transportation perspective, rapid transit is all about moving people, growing ridership, and building connections, but it impacts so much more. And this study is about city building and integrated land use and built form. And I think it is very important to have Ed say a few words about how this project fits into the city planning framework.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mark. I wanted to take council just very briefly through a kind of the larger context of what we're talking about when we do talk about city building. And then the consultants will speak to specific areas along the Hurontario corridor. But if you look at the map that's just been put up on the screen, you'll see that the location, obviously, of the Hurontario corridor is geographically right in the middle of the city. And it also intersects with our bus rapid transit line, which is going to start construction by the end of this year and then into heavy-duty construction next year. Again, in the geographic center of the city. So both lines, and in particular the Hurontario line, they spent there'd be a lot of emphasis on city building and infill and redevelopment all along that line. But when you look at how the Hurontario line connects into the regional transit system, and that's at the Lakeshore GO line in Port Credit, the Streetsville line in Cooksville, our bus rapid transit or major bus terminal in the city center, we really do have the makings of an integrated network, if you will, with, again, our local bus system feeding into the various stations along the way. And if I can just take those of you who certainly read about it, if you remember this, read about it, Toronto in the 50s, before the Yonge Street subway line was built, before the Bloor-Danforth line was built. And you think today when you see along each of those lines in terms of what they've done for city building and how they've really transformed development in Toronto, I mean, it really is quite amazing. So I guess the point messaging I want to leave you with, this is a point in time which I think is going to be absolutely transformational for this city. Again, the consultants will take you through the details, but if you look at that map and you look at how it fits into the network and you think about the redevelopment opportunities, as we go along the line from the south end along the waterfront through the stable area of Minneola, but once we're north of the QEW, there already is a significant amount of higher density residential. We get into Cooksville where we have just amazing opportunities for redevelopment around the Cooksville GO station. I think the local council has talked about the possibilities of the T.L. Kennedy School. The Dundas Street corridor is also being contemplated by Metrolinx as a higher order transit link. So again, tying into the Hurontario, we hope LRT line, that provides just huge opportunities for development. And then as we get into the city center area, You're going to see over the next few weeks, I believe, some incredibly exciting work being done by Gladys Jackson and their team, looking at possible alignments of the Hurontario LRT that will actually go right through the city centre. They're looking at a couple of different options, including along Duke of York Boulevard, to again help structure the development in the city centre. And then as you go north of the city centre, you can see how we can serve the Gateway employment area, which is just a huge area, as you can see geographically on the map. But also through the connection to the BRT, the opportunities that provides for linking into the airport corporate center and into the airport. So this really is just a huge city building initiative, and I'm going to just end my comments now by saying we're very aligned with what Metrolinx are proposing. We're certainly aligned with provincial strategy, and we're working on our new official plan, which will reflect what we're talking about today as well. So at that point, I'll turn it over to the consultants.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Martin. Madam Chair, of the committee, I really want to thank you for the opportunity of presenting today. We are extremely excited about the process in which we are engaged, the point at which we are right now. And I speak on behalf of the rest of the team. Jim's here, and he'll pop up to answer any questions later on. But I also want to acknowledge the moment that I think is really interesting. 10 years ago, you would have only have seen one of the commissioners present such a study, and it would have been only a transit study, or it would have been a district plan looking at some of the planning issues. Today is very different. You have both commissioners, and you truly have a combination of the city staff, of many departments coming in together to look at this area, and many different interests looking at this area from a transportation, from a transit, from a city building perspective. It is a very different way of doing studies and of engaging this part of the city. So I want to take you a little bit as to what the study purpose is, and what is it that we're doing, and what is it that we're looking at right now. But acknowledging, as I said at the start, that this is very much about looking at the rapid transit system, but also about the land use and the urban design components that are an integral part of understanding the corridor. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is enhance and improve the mobility and accessibility for all people, linking both cities, and also speak to the economic viability of the city, in particular along the corridor, and the quality of life and the quality of environment that we see unfolding here. So I want to also suggest that we are in a moment of time where we have some unique opportunities that we can capitalize on, but that also, depending on how we treat the corridor, we can create some new opportunities, and that we can really engage a number of factors and a number of city building objectives and have them all come together. So some of the opportunities that exist, these are things that you will be very familiar with. Certainly Places to Grow has placed an incredible emphasis, not only in terms of how we go about dealing with mobility, but how do we go about integrating it into the built form and in the way the city develops. So focusing on infill and focusing on places where infrastructure already exists, seeking for complete and compact type communities. You're also very familiar with the Metrolinx Regional Transportation Plan, which has placed Hurontario right up front and center and prioritized what's happening on Hurontario for rapid rail, for high order transit, and has really sought to link it to a much broader network of transportation systems. Mississauga's own thinking, certainly as it's reflected through the growth management strategy and the current thinking in the official plan, is very much, as Ed had described, about focusing growth, about focusing on a lot of activity and the transit network in and along these areas, linking the city center and all of the other parts of it. So the thinking it's kind of the perfect storm right now. A lot of things coming together in terms of focusing intensification, focusing the energy in and around Hurontario. Some of the potential that we can start leveraging on, certainly the province and the feds have started to talk about very strongly about investing in infrastructure and investing in transit. The province has already identified through the Metrolinx and the RTP Hurontario as one of the first priority areas to invest in. They've already earmarked $11.5 billion for this purpose, and as well the federal government is doing this. So we need to capture this as it currently stands. At the end of the day, part of the potential as well exists in the fact that this is already a very well-used corridor. We already have 28,000 people using it every day, and just so you get an idea, this is above and beyond what often triggers higher order transit. Many other cities have started to introduce higher order transit at 25,000 people. We already have the demand, and the demand can only increase as the area continues to develop. At the end of the day, there's a true sense that Mississauga is coming of age, that Hurontario is coming of age, that this is an area that is really maturing and will continue to mature, and that transit and that the appropriate form of development is a big part of it. An indication of this certainly has been the public consultation that we've engaged through this process, and that other processes have engaged the 21st century conversation that kick-started with the strategic plan process was a key part of that. And what we heard during that process was incredibly pointing towards the need of having transit. 24% of respondents at that time suggested that transit was one of their priorities. And we also heard very strong messages geared around creating an urban environment that's walkable, that has an urban character, that is dynamic, vibrant, and that has a strong ability to be used from a pedestrian scale. And that really ties together the transit infrastructure and the urban design and the land use in the way that the corridor develops. So we're thinking about it all together. In creating new opportunities, certainly by focusing transit, one of the things that we've seen happen in many other cities is that as soon as you place a strong and well developed transit infrastructure, you see that development follows. And you see a lot of what are currently vacant or underutilized sites all of a sudden become a really interesting place for higher and better development to take place. So this is the experience for many other cities, and we've really tried to study and look at all the different places where this can happen. And I'll go through some of the different areas along the corridor, because this as well is something that can be very strategically targeted. Some areas will be the focus for new development, some areas not. Some areas we want to continue protecting as stable neighborhoods. We see that Hurontario is really a critical factor in the long-term success of both cities, certainly of Mississauga, in terms of how it goes about moving people and how it goes about maturing as a city, but as well in how it goes about creating a more sustainable future, in how it goes about managing its long-term assets and really creating a place where people want to be, to live, to work. So it's also a matter of creating a beautiful street. It's also an exercise in placemaking and in city building. And this is a photo in Cooksville, but we can really imagine what the potential is. And we really need to be looking at the transit infrastructure as inherently tied with the whole streetscape, with the whole thing, the whole package of how the corridor develops. And this is the way that we're going about thinking it. So we've talked about it as a 21st century Main Street. It's not a Main Street in the sense that some villages used to have a Main Street. It's an 18-kilometer Main Street, 12 kilometers of which are within Mississauga, 6 are within Brampton. And we really need to see this as an incredible exercise in city building. It's a place where we can start focusing many of the objectives for the city in terms of how they start to unfold and how we can start leveraging Hurontario as a way of building and developing the city. You can see examples of many other places where the investments and the evolution of one corridor really has an impact over the entire city. So the vision, and there's 3 slides that I'll actually read out because this has been wordsmithed with the public, with a number of stakeholders, with many people. that we have 3 paragraphs that are building up on what our vision is. So the first part of that vision is about providing easy, reliable, and reliable is a key idea in all this, frequent, comfortable, and convenient rapid transit system and a service throughout the corridor with effective connections to other links in the interregional transit network. So it's really also about linking it to the much bigger environment. And the state at which we are right now, we've narrowed it down to 2 different systems, BRT, so bus rapid transit, and LRT, light rail transit. And the next phase of our study is going to be about selecting one of these and moving it forward. Second aspect of the vision is about creating a beautiful street with attractive places along the corridor, featuring expanded mobility, vibrant economic activity, and livable, connected, mixed-use neighborhoods. And a key aspect of this is integrated with the transportation infrastructure. The third part of our vision is about recognizing and reinforcing the regional urban system, much of what Ed talked about, and the planned urban structure of each city, and accordingly encourage mixed-use, compact, intensified, transit-oriented development directed along the corridor, customized to suit the varying and distinct nature of each existing community. And I'll go through the different communities because we want to be sensitive to the presence of adjacent stable neighborhoods, and we also want to be able to recognize where development ought to go and can be directed, and we can start talking about it in that way. So there's a larger context. We're also obviously fitting into two different cities, but we also recognize that every part of the corridor is unique and distinct and different. It needs to be treated in such a way. We need to develop not only a transit system, but also a corresponding land use and urban design that acknowledges the uniqueness of each part of the corridor. So what we've done is we've developed what we call character areas. And there's a number of character areas that unfold and that are very different in themselves. So I'll go through some of them. The first one, if I'm going south to north, and what you see in each one of these is an aerial photograph that overlays some of the key pieces of infrastructure coming in, and then a conceptual image of the today and the future, what it looks like today, and what it can look into the future. So what we see in Port Credit and the vision that's developing for Port Credit is very much about building upon the existent, vibrant, pedestrian-oriented community, focusing on the notion that this is really a gateway to the city and a gateway to the whole region, where we can create and focus around a mobility hub that incorporates the GO station and a number of transit opportunities, but also really captures, as Ed had mentioned, the village character of Port Credit and some of the history and heritage that exists there, and really build on that experience. It's very much about the scale and the built form of buildings that supports the pedestrian activity. And inherently, this is the place where the city connects with the waterfront. And we need to ensure that this functions both at the neighborhood scale and at the city and regional scale. Mineola is an area where we don't see much change. This is not a targeted area for growth. Quite the reverse. We see that this is an area where it's about maintaining the existing residential context and directing new opportunities to the edges and to the perimeters. It's also developing the corridor is a way of improving on some of the current attributes, such as the tree canopy and the healthy landscape, but at the same time improving the pedestrian and the cycling opportunities and how these things might ultimately function to better connect people east, west, and north and south. The downtown hospital, this is sort of south to north, the first area that is part of the urban growth center. This is about transforming, again, the streetscape to be pedestrian oriented. It's about creating mixed-use center that incorporates higher density and development and really capturing on the potential of what can happen here. The hospital is a magnet, it's a destination, but we can expand on it. And you see in yellow there's many high-rise developments already. We need to reorient them so that they face the street, and we can create new frontages and really build on the pedestrian experience along the street. At the end of the day, this is an area that can be both a very strong employment and residential center that really captures a lot of the activity and the energy that is possible given the transit network. Cooksville is another area where we have an incredible heritage to it. There's a history of it being a village, and much of that character and those attributes can be brought back. A lot of it is about remembering Cooksville. And Cooksville has an incredible amount of opportunities for new development to come into play. It always amazes me how it's one of the areas that I find more pedestrians on Cooksville than almost any other area in the city. And it's incredible, because it almost seems that that's the case despite the streetscape and despite many other circumstances. So there's already a critical mass of people, and there's already a critical mass of activities. Now it's a matter of giving it shape and form, and in such a way that really supports and benefits from the transit system. Cooksville is also a mobility hub. It has a GO station, and we can really leverage and capture the energy that comes from it in order to create some interesting development opportunities that are also about placemaking. It is very much about establishing a renewed sense of place. Downtown Fairview, this is a whole area that really connects Cooksville to the downtown core. This is an area that really it's about incorporating some of the existing and potential high density, both in the high-rise form and through the mix of uses. It's also about incorporating and reorienting things towards the street. It's not how it happens right now, but that's very much where a strong potential exists. It's about selective infill. And in all of the different characters, areas, you'll see that we're not talking about taking away what's currently there, but it's about shaping it and selecting the places where we can trigger a transformation of what's really, really there. About bringing, and the strong priority is about bringing activity to the street, because that's what's going to make it an attractive place for transit. The downtown core, much thinking is going into here, and we're tapping into all of that. Glatting Jackson is doing a whole separate exercise on it, and this is really one of our first priority areas to focus new growth. This is the area where we can really see a lot of things happening. The idea is to capture the mobility hub, capture all of the energy, capture a lot of the confluence of things that are happening, to really think about it as a true downtown. A place that has a mix and a critical mass of activities and a number of things that function as a major destination for civic, cultural, retail, commercial, residential, and entertainment activities. It is also an area where it's a very strong focus for it to be pedestrian-oriented. The Eglinton-Bristol character area is one of these other areas that is really about connecting. And it changes in itself. There's areas where we're supporting the existing stable neighborhoods, and there's also pockets where it's about creating a new energy and really capturing the potential of using the transit system. So it's about focusing around a new node that is and functions as a mixed-use center for retail, commercial, and residential activity that is in itself very much about it being pedestrian-oriented and grade-oriented. Mississauga, the employment areas are slightly different. This is the only area where we don't have residential, given the airport restrictions. But we do see it still functioning as a truly mixed-use environment where you have a number of office, employment, some commercial and retail supporting activities, and where really things happen in a way that along the corridor it's very much pedestrian-oriented, and as you move away from the corridor, you have some of the more traditional employment uses. But it's creating a new frontage for the city, a new frontage that can really max out the opportunities for the transit system. So street-related retail, for example, on some of the office buildings, and really creating that pedestrian environment that can support a lot of the new and emerging employment uses. So in summary, some of the key ideas that I want to leave you with is that The corridor is made out of completely different, unique character areas, where we can talk about directing growth in the most appropriate ways. And how we do it is really about understanding some of the land use and the urban design opportunities that can then capture and best use the transit system. It's also a city building exercise. It's about creating beautiful streets. It's about moving people, which is creating more sustainable urban form, and it's about connecting destinations. It's making it accessible to people within the city. And that's why we've captured it as in moving forward with a 21st century Main Street. That's my part, and I'll introduce Matt again to talk about the study process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Antonio. I think you've done a great job at encapsulating sort of our first milestone, which is really setting the direction for our project and some of the guidelines that we're going to follow as we move through into phase 2 and phase 3 of this study. With phase 2, as we're getting into that, we've got a general direction. Now we're getting into the details of what we can do with the right-of-way, what we can do with the land use along the adjacent corridor. We're getting into more information such as bike lanes, whether they can be accommodated in different sections of the corridor. We're looking at things like proof of concept sites. We're taking a few examples along the corridor and seeing what there is now and what it can become if this was to happen. This whole process is being done in conjunction, or at the same time, as Mark mentioned, as the AFP process evaluation is unfolding with Metrolinx. And I think our report outlines that we have a strong case for rapid transit, but obviously through that process, it will really require, there's a lot of competition as well from other municipalities looking for those funding, and we'll certainly need to have strong champions to drive this project forward in that. And then the final stage of our study, which is due to end in the fall, is really developing all the details of the plan, all the official plan policies, all the zoning, all the details that will require. And I think on the last slide I had outlines some of the elements of that final document and what it will cover. It will obviously talk about a preferred route and technology for rapid transit, where we might have to deviate off of the Hurontario corridor. We'll talk about all these supporting land use and urban design policies that we need to incorporate, community improvement plans along different aspects of the corridor. We will have details on the cost estimate so we can make that strong business case that we need. We're also working with Brampton and looking at how the interim transit service plan can unfold over time, assessing the cycling network opportunities along the corridor. We also want to have a clear roadmap on how we're going to move forward on this project after this. And that includes items such as how we're going to complete the A process. We're going to do the first 2 stages through this study, but then there's some different options on how we proceed from here. And even beyond that, how we go into the next stages once hopefully we secure funding for this project. So with that, that's the end of our presentation today. And if you have any questions, I'm sure myself or any of the study team would be happy to answer.
Thank you, Matthew. Frank, Councillor Dale?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can tell you that from the first day I was elected, I always felt that Hurontario was the first area that we should be looking at an enhanced mode of transportation, because it's our natural spine that divides the city and has much of the density along it as well. As a matter of fact, I always felt that, and still do, that it should have gone ahead of the BRT. But the BRT is here, and I think the connection of the BRT with the Hurontario will work well. Because the reason I always felt Hurontario, because I strongly felt that we want to either move people from Brampton that work here into our city more rapidly, and secondly, just made sense to keep people in Mississauga rather than traveling through our city to get them to other areas. But having said that, I do see the natural connection, plus I could see the rationale with the BRT so far as it does link into our airport corporate center, as well as it does link into our subway system, so the two together will work well. The mayor often says that we didn't plan our city as best as we possibly could with respect to transportation, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. However, I think if we've failed, in my opinion, it's that we haven't phased development with our transportation networks. And this is one of the concerns I have even with a project with this type of magnitude, is that it's fine to say there's a lot of areas that can redevelop, and certainly there are along the Hurontario corridor, but if we allow the densities to be built and haven't got the commitment, not only from the province as far as the rapid transit along here in Ontario, but the funding for it, we're going to be in the same mess we are right now with respect to congestion. And that is, I use it as an example, as our city center, where all the densities are in place there, the zonings are in place there, yet the transportation networks can't keep up to it. And we bought in on those densities based on the fact that there'd be a certain modal split between transportation, as far as taking buses or any mode of rapid transportation, and the amount of cars that would be on the road as well. So I think strategically we have to look at this corridor as how we phase development in. So until the actual rapid transit's in place, there's a certain density, and then as it gets in place, there's a, for lack of a better term, a bonusing. And I think if we do that, it'll make it a much better city, because this is a natural. It not only connects to neighborhoods along that corridor, but it actually connects our city center to Brampton City Center, and I think that's important as well. But certainly I look forward to comments from our planning commissioners how we can strategically do that, so that, and we can stage it. I look at it's the cost to do it from one end to the other is astronomical. But if we even started from, and I just use, I'm not a transportation expert, but just common sense tells me, even if you went from Dundas to Eglinton and did that central core first, because you've got everything feeding into it. I think the highest usage of our buses are along Dundas, Burnhamthorpe, and Hurontario. So that all connects, as well as with the BRT, plus you've got the Cooksville GO line. So it just seems to be a natural to do that. So they're my comments for now, but I think we really have to strategically look at how we phase development in, so that we're not in the same position that we are right now with our city center and other areas of the city, where in fact that the development is rapidly gone through prior to any transportation networks to meet that demand.
Councillor Yanika.
Thank you. Certainly I welcome the information. I apologize for using this little anecdote, because I guess some of us maybe haven't been around too long, but I was using the following relative to the situation with regards to another federal study on transit and the Via Rail and the rail service in this city, where the federal government's come out once again and said, are we going to assess whether we put in the Windsor corridor, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver corridor? Turns out that the first Royal Commission or major study on that was done in 1973. So 35 odd years later, let's look at it again. No need to look at it, morons, just do it. I've never read any of the studies. I've never been involved in any way, but I already know what it's going to say. It's going to say you have to double the track, because any Canadian knows that, because it's been around 35 years. There's a cost to that. You have to get the rights of way, and that's what really costs money. But there's the new generation of track that allows us to do it with magnets, and it all makes sense. And we've all heard it. Never went to any of the sessions. They're all collecting data, and they want to study it again instead of just doing it. And we are the only nation on the planet with a corridor like that and all of our density, and we don't do it. My rather dramatic and overstated juxtaposition to that is Cooksville. And this is the last time I'm going to say it before I vote to freeze all development in Cooksville. All of this information has made me very hopeful, and yet it's gotten me quite ornery in the last couple of weeks because of all of the information that has come forward. Sometimes you need outsiders to tell you what you haven't seen for the longest while, or you haven't focused on. And in the last couple of weeks, Councillor Dale and I have spent a lot of time listening to and learning from outsiders. And let me just tell you how the world looks from our perspective. I want to give you a little bit more background. I spent a session yesterday with my biggest ratepayers group, Cooksville London Park, biggest in the city, right? 2,200 homes. This is their phrase, not mine. Wish I could take credit for it. Andrew, all this talk about smart growth, you guys talk smart, you act stupid in Cooksville. Just walk through it and show us what the hell it is that you're talking about that's ever happened. Good transit, great transit. But all these themes and items that are coming forward, it's like, sound great. You certainly don't implement them in Cooksville, which is where you all, if you listen to your rhetoric, should be implementing it if you believe what you're saying. And then we expanded upon, as the Councillor Dale has been involved a lot of this. Metrolinx comes out of nowhere. They just asked everybody in the province, what are the important linkages to you? Where should transit be going? Out of nowhere, they come up and say, oh, Mississauga, you might not know it, but Dundas Highway 10, biggest priority in the province. It's fantastic. Nice to hear that from you. And what people say is irrelevant. What people do with their money is important. So about 10 days later, Bill comes along and says, you need $30 million for a parking structure in Cooksville. Wow, thanks, isn't this great? I guess you folks see something here. There was one very poignant one that happened, and this is sort of the basis of my ire. Councillor Dale and I, apart from dealing with Downtown 21, are also involved with Future Direction Community Services. We had that session this week. The first speaker, almost on cue, a woman whom I do not know, but involved in libraries, said, you've got to explain something to me, Councillor. She was asking the wrong guy. You know, Cooksville, all this density, all these, I don't know how well you know Cooksville, Councillor, but I looked at your library, like, it's the weirdest thing. It has no straight front, it comes in from behind, it's not even at grade, and I don't know if you're aware, per square foot, it's the busiest library in the city. Really? Who knew? I had to give away my right arm to get it from a developer who accepted it because we gave him a police station on his property next door, and he gave us a favorable lease. Remarkable. The other piece, Councillor Dale, you recall, it's rare that after 20 years I hear something that's monumental. I don't know how many of you knew this. This blew my drawers off. When you consider movement in your city, this is what we learned from the Downtown 21, a great session that we had a couple of nights ago. I was startled to learn that movement in your city related to work, transit movement, car, is 20%. I thought it was like half. Just intuitively, I think half of all people moving in cars every day are going to work or coming from work or something related to work or on a courier doing work. It's 20%. Are you ready for this? Shopping is more. It was 22. But the biggest one of all was culture and recreation. About 20% each. It's 40%. But we haven't got that problem in Cooksville. We have no cultural recreation. The next thing they said, Councillor Dale, you recall, is any great city, any great downtown, you're within 500 meters of all these types of things. And I said, if you come to Cooksville, you better pack a lunch and put on walking shoes and do some marathon training because you ain't walking there anything. And at our session, Councillor Dale, well, Councillor, you haven't got a hockey arena, you haven't seen it. You haven't got a community center. That funny library that you were criticizing, that's what I've got. Smart growth, the places to grow. This is where the people are. Why would we put services here? I want to go a step further. As I say, you caught me in an ornery mood. To be discussed further, but we were dealing with a little redevelopment, the old Cooksville site. Staff have now come forward and said, Councillor, you need the Cooksville site relative to the lovely little townhouse project we want to build next door, kind of that Oakville theme, live work. Not sure we can give up that site yet. Why? Well, you know, transit's coming to Highway 5 and 10. Yes, it is. Well, we need that site for sort of the transit and everything we need. I blew a gasket. I said, no, we don't need that site 2 blocks away, a kilometer away. We're going to buy a site at Highway 5 and 10. I'm going to tell you the site we're going to buy. We're going to buy the old CIBC building next to our parking lot because I'm not going to do it on the cheap because we're fed up with this in Cooksville. It's where the node is. That's where we'll do it. Sell the other one and take those monies and let's build a proper facility in Cooksville. So with all of this talk, I have another one still. Planning Commission approaches me and says, now, time to review the Cooksville plan. Yes, it is. Councillor Unique, you can talk about growth redevelopment in Cooksville because that's the only way I'm going to make Cooksville be what I want it to be. I embrace it, I accept it. But we're kind of considering Cooksville as really the downtown core. Yeah, I've been saying it for 20 years, but that's fine. So you may be looking at the same densities, fantastic. But why would I put a municipal service there? So from our perspective, and this is what I spent 2 hours with my ratepayers this week, when they heard it all, listen to the phrase, y'all talk smart growth, why do you act so stupid in Cooksville? And fed up acting stupid, but talking a big game. So what I said to them and what I'm saying to all of you, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, I thank the mayor because she's aware of it. I know she's very much in favor of my idea for T.L. Kennedy or something similar, but I love the T.L. Kennedy idea because they have the most important thing of all, they have a big block of land. If it was an old industrial factory, I'd be talking the old industrial factory instead of the school. If that does not become the #1 priority for the city, not tomorrow, but in the 3 to 5 to 7 years where all of this other infrastructure comes forward, I will not be approving another expansion of the hospital in Cooksville, because I've had it and my residents have had it. Final point I'll leave you with, for those of you that be new to the game, learn this along this way as well. We talk about our downtown core, all the things that we want to do. I remind all of you that when we finish, not today, finish building the downtown core, Cooksville, in a somewhat larger geographic area of the ring road system, has and will have more residential units than the downtown will have. And you can't walk to a damn thing. It's an embarrassment. And I've helped perpetuate it, and I apologize to my constituents for it. It stops now. So you got all these great ideas, fantastic. No more smart talk. Let's start doing some smart things. And then we accept all of the density that keeps coming. Second, in government-assisted housing, to Councillor Mahoney here. And more to come, and I accept it. But for God's sakes, throw us a bone. Because if we believe what I'm hearing around this table, it's about time it is addressed, and I think this is our last chance to address it. So I'm fully endorsing everything you say. I've been saying it for 20 years. Just go stand at the corner of Highway 5 and 10. It's the only 24-hour animated site in the whole city. Go there at 5 o'clock in the morning, you will see people. It's just universal.
I'll be doing that.
That's there. It's about time we started recognizing that if it's doing all the things that a modern city in the third millennium should be doing, it should look like, I want somebody to walk out and go to a public meeting space in Cooksville. I want you to build the additional condominiums. I accept them opposite the GO train station. It's a no-brainer. But I also hope they can walk to a swimming pool. I also hope they can walk to a place where you might throw a frisbee. Long overdue. Contrary to the tone I'm taking, I'm excited because I think it all has to come together and it can in this plan. But the recreational cultural component finally has to be addressed. Again, Madam Mayor, I'm preaching to the converted, Madam Mayor. I know you know it, and I know you've taken a leadership role on this T.L. Kennedy proposal. Madam Mayor, you said then, keep putting it together, let's follow up. We'll be following up with our friends from the school board, but at some point we've got to commit to it. We may have to write a smallest check because I think so much of the money will come from the project. And then we can look my constituents in the face and say, this is the smart growth we were talking about. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Mayor McCallion?
Yes, this is quite exciting. I think this is an opportunity for us to put transportation in place before the development occurs. Yes, there's along Hurontario Street. It's very spotty, and a lot of vacant land still to be developed from the city core up to Brampton. Few office buildings are occurring. We always hoped that Hurontario would be our University Avenue. We refer to it as University Avenue. And quite honestly, this will not happen without the density, because the cost of operating light rail transit, we know what it is all about at Metrolinx. And what is concerning me, as we talk about how you finance it, capital cost is one thing, the operational cost is another. We had a public participation on road tolls, etc. And the public was very negative on the results. In other words, they want these services and they know that it's the only way we should be going. But the public input that Metrolinx undertook was very negative on how it's going to be paid for. Not the capital as much as the operating. So it's a wonderful system, and I'm so happy that finally we're going to put in place a transportation plan if we have the determination to do it, that will be there before the major density occurs, both office, commercial, up number 10 highway. I would hope, Mr. Sajecki, that this light rail transit will determine the type of development that we will allow along number 10 Hurontario Street, because we've allowed some that does not support the light rail transit. It's already there, and it is not supportive of light rail transit, because you've got to have volume to support a light rail transit. You can't be dreaming about a light rail transit, but we have complaints now about empty buses running around Mississauga. We can't have empty light rail transit cars running up and down Hurontario Street. So let's be practical. If we're going to have a light rail transit, then we have to accept the density that will allow light rail transit to occur. For instance, there's a plan now coming to council, I believe, I don't know if it's in yet, of the school board lands that I believe is major office commercial along the front of those lands. Well, you're going to have to deal with it in light of light rail transit. That's going to be a major condition on which we should look at those major office construction that is planned for there. And by the way, in regard to the corridor, Windsor corridor, think about the link to the airport that we've studied so often. I think there was a report in the paper last week. I was on 3 of those studies, believe it or not, appointed in 3 of those studies, and it still hasn't happened. So we talk about a lot of plans, but when it comes to the implementation, quite honestly, folks, if you sat on Metrolinx and you know the cost of doing what has to be done in this greater Toronto area to have an integrated transit system, I don't know where the money's going to come from. I really don't. It is astronomical, the amount of money required to even make an impact on the gridlock in the greater Toronto area. Make an impact, in fact, to try to stop it from getting worse is millions and millions of dollars that we have to look at. But we got to do the planning, and that's what I like about this. At least the plan will be there. As to when it will be implemented will depend completely on the provincial government and the federal government as to whether it's implemented. As we're struggling with the BRT right now, as to whether we'll have the funding because of the overrun in it. So it's good to plan. I find it difficult to figure out how we're going to finance it. And I guess it's good to have the plans there. I don't know what will come out of this economic turndown to the plans of Metrolinx. I really don't. We looked at it last Friday, a week ago Friday, we talked about it as to whether some of the plans that we put before the province, with them coming forward with a budget this week of 18 billion deficit, as to how they will react to the demands of Metrolinx. But this is what is needed. And just remember that we're also looking at light rail transit on Dundas Street as well, which is extremely important, as well as Lakeshore. Now, when you talk about, you're talking, I appreciate your dreaming, but I'm not as great a dreamer, and maybe I'm too practical. But when you talk of large gaps of land that can remain low density along the light rail transit, I have concerns. I have concerns. Because it takes density to make a light rail transit happen. Right? Am I wrong? No. Okay. So there's a large gap there between the Lakeshore and the You showed a program there. And the buildings are right up against the street. And it's solid, except for the roadway in the middle. Do we want that in Mississauga? That's what we want. Look at the street. Solid. I've been in Taiwan. It's solid, and they're building a light rail, an underground, a subway in the middle of the street. There's very few trees and very little green space along the way. It's just solid, high rises all the way. I'm not sure that people in Mississauga want that. So we got some philosophy to overcome. We have some philosophy to overcome in order to get light rail transit going in the city of Mississauga. And when density comes up at council meetings and planning, there's a lot of concern raised by the public, and sometimes by the council. So we have to face up to it. If you want light rail transit, you got to accept the density along the line. And then the feeder lines come in. So great plan, and Metrolinx is quite excited about this. It has a major priority with Metrolinx, our light rail transit on Hurontario Street. If we can bring it along to the point that it can start to be implemented, that Metrolinx will be supportive of it. Because if we're not ready for it, it'll get pushed back. So it's very important, Martin, that we be upfront and be ready for it so that when it comes to Metrolinx, that we can say it's ready to go. The reason that Viva got approval to go is because they were ready to go. That was the York region got approval because they were ready to go. So we better be ready to go when it comes to Metrolinx, the funding of our light rail on Hurontario Street.
I think Mrs. Jackie wants to comment.
Yeah, I just want to comment on what the mayor was stating, as well as a couple of the other councillors, is that, you're right on in terms of density. I mean, we have to have the kind of density to support, transit-oriented development. I would draw your attention, though, that it's not just the density, it's also the built form. And some of you will remember, and I'd like to tell this little story, where we were struggling to get right next to Hurontario a front door on a building up in the employment area. I guess it was up in the heartland. And in any event, we said, at some point you're going to have we hope, light rail there, and surely to God, you want to be able to allow people to get off that light rail and walk in the front door of the building, or vice versa. I think the other point is, this is an 18-kilometer corridor. So to expect every piece of that to have kind of the same character in terms of the built form and density, it's probably not realistic, actually. In the presentation that the consultants gave, they deliberately kind of looked at the different characters along the corridor because, within 18 kilometers, you'll see a lot of different character. I'd even point out that even if you look where you've got the heaviest densities in Toronto, say along the Bloor-Danforth line or the Yonge Street line, even there you see quite a bit of difference in terms of character. The other comment I would make is that in terms of tying what we're doing to other infrastructure, in terms of improving development, I think that's right on. The notion of having milestones that need to be met in terms of transit performance before we go to the next level of density, I think is really quite important. There's an array of planning tools out there, anything from holding bylaws, which you're familiar with, where in fact, before we lift the H, we have to ensure that infrastructure is in place. Through to community improvement plans, through to maybe not even considering an application for rezoning. Those are all things that can be done and must be done. And I think the point that's being made, but tying it also not just to transit, but to the softer services. That's because at the end of the day, this is all about community building. And we could maybe have a successful transit line, but more importantly, we need to have a successful community. And so I just think you're absolutely right on, and your points are being noted and will be reflected in what we bring back to you.
But just remember, we can't put all the density in Cooksville. Right?
And we're not arguing against a lot of it. That's
No.
not the point. We're willing to accept more than our fair share.
But we can't put it all in Cooksville, and that's what we've been doing, I have to say. We've been putting it in Cooksville, and we can't put it, you can't have all the density in one spot, is what I'm saying. You got to spread it in order to make the light rail transit success. And I don't know if you consultants have figured out, but we've asked our staff at Metrolinx to come up with we got all kinds of consultants on the staff. Sometimes I wonder how many we have, but anyway, at Metrolinx. Can you determine what density is required for a light rail transit? We've asked them, what density is required? They got to get some, because that determines whether or not it can be financially viable from an operating point of view. So there's got to be a connection between the operating cost and the density. And we've asked our consultants to look at that.
Councillor Parrish?
I've been accumulating ideas while I'm listening here. This is quite a fascinating conversation. Actually, the subway that runs out to Kipling actually goes up and down as Commissioner Sajecki suggests. It goes through Old Mill, it goes through all kinds of areas that are low density. It goes by Hyde Park, it goes through low and high densities. I don't think you design a city to jam blocks completely along your light rail. I think that would be pretty insane, actually. I think what you do is you build adequate communities, you build what's needed, and you run the rail through it because you're moving batches of people from one point to another. If they happen to go through nice areas that are low density, then so be it. When I moved to Mississauga, and actually Nando was my counselor, and I'm very impressed with your speech today, Nando, because when I moved to Mississauga in 1974, I can remember sitting in my house crying, thinking I've moved back a century. Because Cooksville was so scary for me. It was like everything's dead here, everything's decrepit. I grew up in Eglinton, Caledonia area. And as old as it was, you could walk to Keelsdale Park, you could walk down to the Colony Marble plant down there and you could learn to ride your bike. You could go to Fairbank Memorial High School and learn to swim. There were places you could go, there were parks within walking distance, and it was an old town in an old part of Toronto. So then my parents got very brave. We moved to Etobicoke where everything was spanking new, and I lived at Islington in the Westway. Again, you could walk to parks. There were places to go. You could walk to a valley that ran right behind the top of our street. But I came to Cooksville, I'm going, what the heck have I done? And as a young mother, there was nothing to walk to with kids in a stroller. Now they built Huron Park and it's beautiful, and it eventually, my kids used it, we all used it. But to get to the library, you had to go in the car. And you look at the four corners of Cooksville and you go, holy Moses, this is really bad. And when you talk about the wrong side of the tracks, everything south of the tracks in Cooksville is decrepit. And so if you're going to build light rail, this is an opportunity to clean that up and do an incredibly fine job. And I'm hoping with Nando's vision that that's going to happen there. But it doesn't mean you jam high-rise buildings all the way along it. That would just be going the other extreme. So I hope you're not even thinking about that. I think the light rail concept is perfect. I think it should be running up and down 10, it should be running across Dundas, and we should clean up all across Dundas. It's an opportunity to give new life to that area. And light rail, I've said this a million times, you can remember as a kid going on a train somewhere, it was very exciting. You remember in high school getting on an orange bus, it was not exciting. Kids were barfing to your left, lunch bags were jammed to your right, books were under your feet, and you were going to a place you didn't really want to go. I wasn't a great student. So buses, bad, trains, good. So if you can get people on those trains, whipping up and down and across Dundas, you will have performed a very sophisticated transition for this city. So Nando, as my counselor, I want you to fight for this. And I'm in there to help you.
Councillor Prentice.
Thank you, and Councillor Parrish, I can relate to what you were saying about moving to Mississauga because I moved to Cooksville in 1967 with a 1-year-old child. No buses, no transit, I had no car. I had to rely on somebody to take me grocery shopping. Never mind walk to a park. There were no parks. It was a brand newly developed area, and the roads weren't even paved for a whole year after we moved in. So I can understand that concept and the frustration of not being able to move around the city. And I guess that feeds into the fact that I moved from the Yonge and Finch area in '67 that had everything. It was developed. I go up there now and I think, my God, look at the changes. How can it be more developed than it was when I lived there in the mid-'60s? Nevertheless, I think one of the issues I feel is really important in this. I agree with the finances, I agree with the density, those things. But what about connectivity? You know, I go back representing the mayor on a transportation commission. I think Bob Richards was the CEO of Toronto at that point. And we had the TTC represented on this group. We had every municipality in the GTA sitting on this group talking about how we were going to interrelate with one another as municipalities. How are we going to develop a transit system to get back and forth? We can sit here until we're blue in the face and look at Mississauga, but what's going to happen if we don't have connectivity with Toronto and the other municipalities around us? Toronto was impossible to deal with at that time. I even said publicly at this meeting, I'm sorry, Mr. TTC, you are simply sticking your head in the sand and will not listen to what the communities around you need, because you're so dyed in the wool, you're going to do it this way, that you're not going to let us have interchangeable passes, all the things we need to do to make this a smooth transition moving from one municipality to another. I haven't heard anything about that today, but if you look at the plans that are before us, not just for Hurontario, they have to connect to Dundas, they have to connect to Lakeshore, they have to connect to the BRT if you're running this up and down Hurontario. In turn, all those other east-west transportation systems have to connect with other municipalities, either east of us or west of us. Or they're not going to work. I mean, nobody's going to take the transit from Winston Churchill to the Etobicoke border and say, there, I've done it, that's all I need. We have people that are going back and forth to Toronto, we have people that are going back and forth to Hamilton, and they're going to need the Hurontario-Main to get these people so that they can travel east-west as well. What are we going to do if we don't have willing and cooperative partners that are either east of us or west of us? Has that been looked at all?
I think Metrolinx is looking at it, Councilor Parrish, and with integration. I would say not too much has changed.
Exactly, that's the point I'm making, and that has been like that for the 24 years I've been on council. We have had a problem connecting to Toronto and making it seamless. So what I'm saying to you is we can talk about getting all the money from the provincial and federal governments, we can talk about doing all the studies, we can talk about the densities that should occur. If we don't have the connectivity, this isn't going to work. So I think one of the things we have to focus on is making sure that our partners in the surrounding communities are willing partners. And from everything I read in the paper, we do not have a willing partner to the east of us. Thank you.
Councillor Dale?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to comment a bit on a comment that the Mayor made with respect to the finding, and I totally agree that it's, you know, it's like all our services. It's one thing to pay for the capital, it's another thing to get hit with the operating once it's in place. And, you know, I was using an example as a fire hall. We get paid through by new ones anyways, by new development, through the development charges, and it costs us about $1.4 million a year to operate it. But I'm confident and convinced that if the light rail goes in on Hurontario Street, you're going to see development second to none, because the land values have to go up dramatically along that corridor. What I'm concerned about is that we get into the same situation we're in now, where we allow development to go first, and then we're out begging for the money from the province and the federal government. That's why, Madam Mayor, I think there's got to be a phase-in strategy. And of course, we can use the holding zones, but you can still have built form. They don't have to build on all their property. And I think it sends a message to the province as well with respect to places to grow and all the other legislation that they've jammed down our throats, to say, hey, we're prepared to go this far, but then you come to the table and we'll put in the light rail transit, same with the federal government, get the funding from them, and then the development will just naturally occur. It can't help it occur that way. I just don't want to get the densities built and then we don't have the transportation network in, and that's really what's happened. Look how long, Nando and I were elected in 1988, and we're still waiting for the BRT. You know, we were dealing with that. We were dealing with that when we first got on council. So I don't have the confidence that the light rail is going to happen if you let the rest of the city develop. Put your money where your mouth is, Mr. Province, and let's get the light rail in first. And development can't help it. And great example is North York. They extended the subway system, and boom, up went the development, and it's still being built there. So that was my point.
Recommendation. Councillor Parrish?
Just quickly, I wanted to ask staff, The Hill Board of Education is thinking of putting in 5 big glass towers on the Britannia farm. And we've talked about it around the table as this will generate a need for light rail or more transit along there. Since the school boards are the child of the province, is there any possibility that we could assess that school board a very large percentage of the cost of the light rail, since they are precipitating some of the traffic that's going to have to be accommodated, and thereby assessing the province some of that cost? Have we ever thought of doing something outrageous like this?
Well, I guess the simple answer is they would pay development levies, and that's really the way that you look at the cost of your infrastructure. The dilemma that we have with development levies, and this is an argument that we've been making with the province unsuccessfully to date, is for the last 10, 12 years, there have been limitations in the legislation so that on transit, for example, because we don't currently have light rail, you can't assess for light rail because it's done on the basis of historic service levels and not proposed or future service levels. And this is one of the changes that EMO, and in fact I know the mayor, has brought to the attention of the province on many, many occasions. And at one point we thought the province was going to look at the legislation, and then I guess, you know, for political reasons they chose not to.
Well,
so,
I was thinking more along the lines of a surcharge. This is
well,
we
have no legislative ability. The province could just thumb their nose at us, and that would be the end of it. I mean, there's no. Oh, are there sort? Well,
Well, I'm just going to add, and we have a meeting actually this Friday with Metrolinx, with Janice and others. I know that the Metrolinx staff, at least, are looking at trying to put in some kind of a surcharge, if you will, that would take advantage of the uplift, if you will, in value as a result. Now, whether they'll be successful with that is a whole other matter, because there have been a couple of false starts at that through the years. Those of you who've been around as long as me might remember when Dale Martin did a review for the province, looking at trying to do that along the Shepherd Avenue line, and there were other consultant studies that were done. And every time they try to do that, it seems we hit another recession, and then so you get a big pushback, if you will, from the development industry. But is the principle a good one? It's an absolutely excellent one. I mean, in places like Hong Kong, that's how they finance a lot of their transit infrastructure. But here, I mean, it's on for discussion. But I agree with Janice. I mean, we're really in the province's hands.
Thank you.
Councillor Adams.
Thank you. Isn't there an opportunity through Section 37 to request additional fees?
Sure. I mean, I think that certainly is another possibility, because in the case of the Britannia farmlands, I mean, they do need official plan and zoning changes as well. I mean, it's a question of, you know, we have to make sure that we have you know, the right criteria in our plan in order to do that. So we have to put something in place, which is not, I guess, if we're looking at funding transit, that is not just a one-off. That would have to be done more globally across the city, which I think is a good idea.
And I don't want it to act as a deterrent. At the end of the day, we obviously want the jobs that they'll be bringing to the community. So I think we need to strike the right balance there. Thank you.
Mayor McCallion.
Yeah, well, the development levies, the Premier's made a statement, he's not opening it up, so that's gone. And it's certainly not going to be opened up. He's told the building industry, an announcement, it will not be opened up. And we're only getting 90%. Right? We lose out on the 10. It's interesting, when we fought for the 100%, transit didn't seem to be in the minds of the provincial people at the time. It's just interesting. Here we were fighting for the 10% for transit. We felt it was a hard service, just like water, sewer, and everything else. But we didn't win on it. They threw it in with baseball diamonds and community centers. They felt the same treatment for them. Yeah. Metrolinx is looking at, you know, we've got to finance these projects. The province, yes, has allocated $11.5 billion. That's the capital cost. That's a one-shot deal. And we don't even know how much. In fact, the program that we've given them is $13.5 billion. With the projects that could get moving now to have some impact. But we still are struggling with how will we finance, how will the municipalities or Metrolinx, it's not sure yet whether whether the interregional projects will be dealt with like GO. You know, if you could switch all the interregional projects to the GO plan, then the province accepts the responsibility. We'll maybe have to make a contribution, etc. So the whole idea of financing the Metrolinx is a big question mark. But we're working on many angles. The province is hesitant on us coming out with a plan at this point because, in their opinions, it's a tax increase. You know, they relate, but the operating cost of transit to a tax increase if we went with toll roads and such. So we're not anywhere near how it's all going to be financed, I just have to tell you. We're struggling with it, as Ed said, we're looking at all kinds of alternatives, but it's the province that must accept them.
Madam, if I might just further to Janice's point about the development charges and the difficulties with it. I mean, the fundamental difference is we're seeing a huge shift in terms of what the urban needs are of urban centers versus what development charges were set up to do. Development charges were basically set up for greenfield development. And so we understand what's needed in terms of sewer and water and all that kind of stuff. But when you hear what you're talking about today, I mean, you're talking about what does this mean in terms of how we redo our communities. And our baseline is because of the way the Development Charges Act is set up, is what we have to look back into the previous levels of service. And it's just not sufficient for redeveloping communities like ourselves.
Thank you very much. I think maybe we could move item 2 off, and there's a recommendation if someone is prepared to move it. Councillor Dale, is there anything else on this item? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to turn this off. We'll move on.